Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another book review for you, and that is for The Shadow on the Glass by Jonathan L. Howard. This is a book that I actually didn't even know existed until a couple weeks ago as of time of recording this. But I was looking through Hoopla, where I have my audiobooks through my library, which I would highly recommend. But I recently also read an Arkham Horror novel, and I was looking through some of the stuff that was published by the same publisher, Aconite Books, and I noticed that this book was on there. This is actually not a Arkham Horror book. This is actually a book that ties in to the Call of Cthulhu tabletop game. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't even know they had books. From what I've seen, they don't have as many as Arkham Horror does, at least from the very brief research that I did, which was not very much, so I could be wrong. But I did see this listed on there, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And not only that, but it was listed as a Cthulhu by Gaslight novel, so kind of a Victorian era type thing, which I thought would be pretty interesting. And so I figured, if I have a chance, then I would listen to it sometime soon, and I did, so here we are. And so I was really interested in reading this. I thought it would be really fun and very something a little bit interesting and different given the setting and all that stuff. And I will say I didn't love this book. It was okay. There are things about it that I did really enjoy, but then there are also some things that just didn't really work for me all that much. It is a book that I would recommend checking out if you're a fan of Lovecraft and Lovecraftian horror and Cthulhu mythos type stuff, but yeah, for me, didn't quite do it. But there are things about this book that I did really enjoy, so I will talk about those first as per usual. I think the thing this book does the best is the setting and the atmosphere. Like I said, this is like a Victorian era book set in London in like the late 1800s, which is a little bit different from what Lovecraft himself usually wrote, and a lot of other stories that are kind of taking inspiration from him, specifically set within the Cthulhu mythos like this book is. Typically that's set like 1920s, 1930s America, a lot of times in like the New England region, whereas this is like late 1800s in England, so it's a little bit different, and I really liked that about it as well. And I think that the setting work of this and the atmosphere of it is very well done when it comes to things like the prose, which itself I thought was pretty well done in this book, to the kind of dialogue that was used, to the descriptions of places and people and all these kinds of things. It just built a pretty strong sense of the setting that I felt was pretty immersive. I felt like this was a pretty immersive book in general, really kind of put you in the headspace of being in this setting and all that kind of thing. So I think that was all really cool. I really enjoyed that about it. That was one of the things I was most intrigued by when I first heard about this book. So it is nice to know that that is, at least for me, one of the things that it did best. I also really enjoyed like the setup of this book, specifically in the way that it relates to the Lovecraftian elements. So in this book, you have the basic pitch for this book, I guess, is you have these two people who are kind of running this business in which they pretend that they are able to basically speak to the dead. And so they are kind of tricking people into, paying for their services and things like that. And they start getting investigated by the local police and detectives and people like that. And so they are thinking about getting out of London. But before they do that, they take on one last job, which inadvertently leads to some weird stuff going on and summon something that should not necessarily have been summoned and that kind of thing. And basically that's where the Lovecraft stuff comes in, which, that's pretty typical for a Lovecraftian story. Like, people start messing with things they shouldn't, and they end up regretting it because it is something that they just should not have been messing with to begin with. So I did enjoy that setup as well, and the way the Lovecraft mythos is used in this book I thought was interesting as well. It is a little bit more, I think maybe just more involved than I would have expected. Like, I mean, I'm not necessarily surprised considering this is a Call of Cthulhu novel, and this is something that I think tends to happen a lot with the Arkham horror books as well, where sometimes the way that the Lovecraftian elements is used is maybe a little heavier than I personally might like. Which I love that stuff, but sometimes I think it works best more so functioning kind of in the background. But I did like the way it was used here regardless. It primarily dealt with things like the great race of Yith, which is kind of interesting. And I enjoyed also, like, you get to see kind of the perspective of this Lovecraftian entity of the great race of Yith, which was kind of interesting. Kind of reminded me a little bit of another series of books that I didn't particularly care for that much in a similar vein, which is the Innsmouth Legacy duology by Ruth Anna Emrys, kind of having that POV from this Lovecraftian creature kind of thing. So, that was kind of cool, and I enjoyed the world building, the Lovecraftian world building of this book. Not only was the real world stuff interesting, but the fictional Lovecraft stuff was also kind of interesting, bringing in like the world building, talking about their history, talking about the way that they view the world and people and all these kinds of things was pretty interesting. So I did enjoy the way that was used, and I also really liked the ending of this book, which I'm not going to talk extensively about because of spoilers and things of that nature. But I feel like something that happens a lot in stories taking influence from Lovecraft, and also many stories by Lovecraft himself, is that the horror and the Lovecraftiness, I guess, kind of keeps kind of building and building and building towards a big climax, where things just get really, cosmic and large scale, beyond human comprehension, things of this nature. If you've read Lovecraft or stories inspired by him, you probably know what I'm talking about. And this book very much has that, and I think does it to a very effective degree that I did really enjoy. I actually think that the first handful of chapters and the last handful of chapters were probably my favorite parts of this book, actually. Which is a little bit unfortunate because the middle portion of this book, outside of the setup and the ending, is the thing that brings this book down for me. I didn't find the overall story and the plot of this book all that compelling. There was bits and pieces here and there that I did enjoy, some different scenes and chapters that I enjoyed, and different aspects of this book, like when it brought in more of the world building or things of that nature that I enjoyed, but the general plot of this book never quite drew me in. Same thing with the characters. Like, I generally enjoyed the characters. Like, I think the dialogue in this book is really well done, very evocative of the time period and the setting, and just kind of entertaining dialogue, I guess. But the thing that really brings this one down for me, for the most part, is that the plot and the characters just never really connected with me. So, like I kind of say sometimes with some books, I tend to really look for, the three kind of core pillars of plot, character, world building. That's how I tend to look at books a lot of the time, and stories in general. And I think this one, the world building was really strong, but the plot and the characters were a little weaker, didn't quite draw me in. And, the world building, to me, as much as it fascinates me in a lot of ways, is probably the least important of the three. So if it doesn't have the two most important aspects of the book, then it's just going to kind of feel a little bit like a letdown, I guess. So that is mainly the reason why I felt like this book was a little bit disappointing. Still had plenty of it that I did enjoy. Like I said, I liked the atmosphere, I liked the world building, all that kind of stuff. But the actual story this was telling just never quite drew me in, which is unfortunate. I would still recommend reading this book if you're a fan of Lovecraft or Lovecraftian horror, because I think it kind of tackles it from an interesting angle and that kind of thing. But for me, it just didn't quite land. So as far as a rating out of 10 that I would give The Shadow on the Glass, I'd give it, personally, a 6 out of 10. It was okay. Didn't quite, really enjoy it, but I liked parts of it. I think it was well worth reading. It's something, like I said, that I would definitely recommend to people who are into this kind of stuff like I am. And it does generally seem like the perception of this book, at least looking at things like Goodreads reviews, is more positive than I felt it was. So it's probably, it's likely that you may enjoy this more than I did. But it just didn't quite land for me. I don't know why, but yeah, story and characters just didn't quite draw me in. But the world building, the Lovecraft elements, all that kind of thing was pretty cool. So I did at least enjoy that about it. So that pretty much wraps up my thoughts here. Let me know in the comments if you've read The Shadow on the Glass and what you thought of it, or any other like Call of Cthulhu books. I know there's a couple more that I've heard about, but I haven't looked into it too much. So if there are other ones you'd recommend, leave that down in the comments, and I will hope to check out more of them someday. So that is pretty much it for this one. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.